And I'm also really thrilled to be on the same bill as Samuel Shem, because I'm a big fan. And back in the day when I qualified, I kind of learnt my medicine from House of God. So I'm a cartoonist and a part-time GP. I work 2 days a week in Brighton, and I wrote this book, The Bad Doctor, which is a fictional book about a doctor called Ewan James, but which contains autobiographical elements. It's the story of medicine, obsessive-compulsive disorder, cycling, and heavy metal. And I will leave you to work out which are the autobiographical elements. And I also do this thing, Sick Notes in The Guardian, as Ronan said, where I comment on the NHS each week. And this is a great gig, but also absolutely terrifying, because I've got to kind of think of something vaguely funny each week for a deadline, often about things that aren't particularly funny. But I'm going to start by talking about Graphic Medicine, which is a website that I run with my colleague M.K. Serwick. And this lists and reviews novels, graphic novels and comics. And I use the kind of terms interchangeably, really, comics and graphic novels. Graphic novels are just comics that need bookmarks, as Art Spiegelman once said. There's a lot of them out there. When I started looking at them, I was doing an MA in medical humanities, and I got interested in medical narrative in comics and graphic novels, and the more I looked, the more I found. And this is quite an old slide, and I hope you're getting all these down, but this is a few years old, and since then the number of graphic novels with kind of, healthcare related themes has just kind of, mushroomed, blown up. And there's sort of various publishers that are getting interested in specifically in works that have got themes pertinent to healthcare. So I coined this phrase, graphic medicine, to denote the interface between the medium of comics and the discourse of healthcare. And when I put the website up, I thought I was being quite clever. I thought, there's not many people interested in this, and I'm going to be like the first person. But people started kind of like immediately contacting me from all over the world, and we formed a kind of like group, a sort of discussion group, I suppose, of academics getting in contact. And Graphic Medicine got on the front of the BMJ. This was written by a colleague of mine, Michael Green, and Kimberly Myers. And then we started organising conferences. So the first conference that we had was in London in 2010. And one of my co-organisers is here. Sort of Columba is up there. And we thought that we would have just like about 25 people turn up. But we had a capacity of 75, and it was kind of oversubscribed. It was booked out, and people came from all over the world. And there was this tremendous buzz, and we just thought, oh, God, this is amazing. So since then, we've had them in Chicago, Toronto, Brighton, Baltimore, Riverside in California. And then this year it's coming back to the UK. It's in Dundee. So what occurs at the interface between comics and medicine? Well, there's lots of things, really. There's educational comics, of course, public information comics. But I was always more interested in the literary side of things, specifically autobiographical graphic novels, which are made by cartoonists who've often had sort of direct experience of illness. And these are what I find really fascinating. And I think as healthcare professionals, we can learn from these works. There are also comics that might bring comfort to people with certain illnesses. It's also worth looking at the process of making comics, because I think there's a therapeutic potential there where people with illnesses can, in workshops, try to make sense of their kind of story, if you like, through making comics. And then comics can also be used as historical artifacts. So they were kind of originally meant as disposable items, but if you look at kind of comics from 1960s that portrayed doctors and nurses, we can glean some information about what society thought about the roles of doctors and nurses at that time. So I'm just going to touch on one. I mean, there's lots of ways to come at this, but I'm just going to sort of briefly sort of mention one angle that I'm particularly interested in. So some colleagues and I brought out this book last year called The Graphic Medicine Manifesto, in which we each took an area of graphic medicine that we were interested in and wrote a chapter on it. So I became interested in the visual depiction of illness in comics and how comics artists might influence the ways in which we conceive of an illness when they depict their own illness in graphic form. So these artists are contributing to what Sander Gilman calls the iconography of illness. And as W.T. Mitchell says, images do not just mirror the world, they help to build it. So if you create an image, you're helping to create the world. So the imaging of diseased bodies is really important in healthcare for both diagnostic and educational purposes. And it's an important way that healthcare professionals sort of build the idea and the schemata, if you like, of illness within their minds. So they build up a kind of picture, and then I suppose, well, thinking of us as doctors, we kind of compare what we think the disease looks like in our head to seeing somebody in front of us with it. And traditionally, the images of disease and illness were made by experts, so doctors, artists, illustrators, and they decided what illness looks like. And the self-picturing of suffering, where people have made images about their own suffering, is a fairly new phenomenon, sort of that expanded in the 20th century due to the availability of suitable media like photography and latterly video, smartphones, social media. So these representations too help to construct these stereotypes, if you like, and inform everybody's conception, really, of what it is to be ill, what illness looks like. So comics artists, if they make images of their own illness, are kind of maybe just influencing in sort of however slight a way, the way that kind of society thinks of that illness. This is a panel from Monsters by Ken Dahl, and this shows the author waking up with a new lover, convinced that he's given her genital herpes. And this image will affect what readers think about genital herpes, for better or for worse. And there's a whole area of sort of debate about stigma, which is a fascinating area, like, is this helpful? Is this not helpful? We haven't got time to go into that now, but leaving that aside, this is going to have some small influence on people who read it, but then maybe sort of disseminating out into the wider public. And comics artists kind of make decisions in the way that they decide to portray themselves, consciously or not. So some of them might, invite the reader to examine their wound very closely, like this from David Small. Some may kind of keep people at arm's length by turning themselves into like an animal or an avatar. So we can't really sort of see in detail what their illness or their wound is all about. Some artists make visible conditions that are invisible. This isn't a comic. This is a print from Dürer, and this is melancholia. So within classical art, there's a kind of a tradition of showing various psychological states of distress. And over the centuries, a visual language has developed which remains powerful today. And we know the classic pose of melancholia when we see it, because we recognize it from images that we've internalized, or maybe from observing depressed people. But is this a natural pose that people adopt when they're depressed, or have we kind of been influenced by, the images we've seen? So I set out to make a graphic novel, which was partly going to be based on my own experiences. And I had OCD from sort of early adolescence probably till my late 20s, it was kind of affecting me in those years. And I'd never talked about it at all, certainly not to medical colleagues, until I got into making comics. And there's something about comics that allows people to unburden themselves. I mean, there's a tradition from American underground comics that sort of really allows, it's kind of prized, people, it's like problems are currency, basically. It allows people to unburden themselves and, expose their vulnerabilities and their whatever. So my OCD was all about religion and magic and luck. And I was kind of like, my adolescent mind was just sort of trapped in this sort of framework. So I used in this was like experimental artwork really before I did the book. So I used the Sephirot of the Kabbalah to provide this kind of framework for a drawing that attempts to convey my experience. And our motives, I think, are often opaque to ourselves. We don't know exactly why we start making artwork or doing a book. Not for the money, because that's just ridiculous. But it seems to me that there's an aspect of performance, as Deborah was saying, in what I've done, both in drawing the book and standing here talking about it. So I suspect that in rendering my OCD into a series of images, I was trying to kind of own it, to transform it from a stigmatizing mental illness into something beautiful and something of mystery and beauty, maybe. So I'm going to show you a few sequences from the book now. So I was a GP for ages in North Wales, in a little village, a little town, not a village, I suppose. And when I first started I made comics for years before getting picked up by a publisher and being offered this book deal. And I didn't tell any of my patients that I made comics because I didn't want them to try and work out who I was talking about. So this is a story of a GP, and I worked in North Wales, so I thought I'd try and sort of throw people off the scent. So I set this in South Wales, and then I gave the GP grey hair, and I called him Yuan, which is very like Ian, and that was a mistake, because originally I was writing it under a pseudonym. So my author's name was going to be Tom, but then I changed to doing it under my own name, but I forgot to change his name. So everybody goes, well, he's Yuan, he's you, So this is, I'll just do a little reading. So this is Yuan and his colleague, Dr. Lois Pritchard, and they're just sort of having a coffee and talking about depression. So listen to this. Someone's suggesting that depression might be caused by worms and parasites. He's reading a medical journal. Blimey. They're proposing that a vaccine might be developed. Yay, here's to the end of introspective depressives. Mind you, the drugs companies would probably scupper it. It cost them a fortune in lost antidepressant sales. I'd hate to see depressives become extinct. I kind of like them. I guess it would be pretty boring if everyone was happy all the time. If they developed a vaccine, you'd have to be immunized as a child. What if you were the last cohort of unimmunized depressives? You'd feel like you'd feel like a member of a cursed and dwindling species, the last of your kind. No one would write any decent poetry anymore, or music. Everyone would sing happy songs about peace and shit. Yeah, banging tambourines. There'd be no goths. And then this is the flashback to Yuan's childhood, so where he's kind of developing childhood rituals. So he's praying in bed. Dear God, please bless our family. And he's got to imagine this kind of like a wave of protection, if you like. Please bless our family, bless Mummy and Daddy, and Andrew, and Nan and Grandad. Bless Sammy the dog, and keep our house safe, and our car safe too, including the brake assembly. And then he gets like an intrusive thought of the car crashing, so he has to kind of like start all over again. Please God, bless our family, bless Mummy and Daddy, and Nan and Grandad, and Andrew, and bless Sammy the dog, until he kind of finally falls asleep. And then this is the kind of development of the slide that I showed you earlier. So he's kind of like trying to keep all these things, concentrate. He's sort of like flying the plane, really. If he doesn't sort of keep his concentration on everybody, something really bad is going to happen. And then there's a bit about music and heavy metal in it, because I sort of grew up in the 80s in Yorkshire, and this is two schoolboys talking about Ozzy Osbourne on the bus. And like Ozzy Osbourne now is a kind of fluffy kind of celebrity who kind of meets the Queen and sort of stuff. But back in the 80s, he was kind of like seen, he was like a folk devil, basically. He was kind of like seen as a serious moral threat to the nation. And there was lots of kind of false rumors going around about him. So this isn't true, what I'm going to say here, but he hasn't sued me yet. But Ozzy bites the heads off live doves? Yeah, every gig. And he sacrifices animals to the devil too. That's horrible. Hey, you div, Ozzy's ace. Anyway, that's nothing. He once killed a dwarf on stage by hanging. God, really? Yeah, but he didn't get arrested because they couldn't prove the dwarf wasn't dead before they hang him. And then this is where Ewan, as a boy, has sort of borrowed some records from school. He's going home. Hello, Sammy. Ruff. He, how are you, little Sambo? Hello, this is his mum. Hello, how was school? Oh, okay. You got some new records? I borrowed some. I'm going to make some tea. Do you want some? Yes, please. He makes tea, comes back in. Sabbath, bloody Sabbath. Killing machine. I'm not sure I like the sound of that. Oh, but I just wanted to. And he's listening to Sabbath, bloody Sabbath. And he gets a tap on his shoulder, and it's his mum. It's Sammy. He's been run over. He runs outside. He just ran out in front of me. I couldn't stop in time. Sammy! Ooh. And, of course, he thinks that he's killed Sammy. I'm so sorry. It's all my fault. I listened to blasphemous music, and God killed Sammy. Please, God. And it's kind of like just starts off his OCD. So that, and then I'll show you some of these, the Guardian sick notes that I've been doing. So I got this gig really after The Bad Doctor came out, and the publicist from my publishers kind of sent a copy to The Guardian to be reviewed, and it got picked up by one of the editors of G2, and he said, well, do you think Ian would consider doing a unique comic strip from us? And I'm like, I read The Guardian. I'm like, bloody hell, yeah, of course. So I did a few full-length things, and then I kind of basically kept pitching them. I'd really like to do a shorter strip, and they eventually said yes. And then I thought, oh, shit, now I've got to actually do it. And sort of, so this is where I try and make it. It's supposed to respond each week to what's in the news, and I've got about a day to do it after, I discuss with the editor what is one of the main topic, or the main topic's funny because there's lots of things that you really can't, I can't find any funny way into them. But anyway, some of them are set in general practice, and this is like Felchester Health Centre. All these symptoms you describe, I'm sure they must be stress-related. You've been doing too much. You're just exhausted. Would you like a tissue, doctor? So it's just like that is a really old kind of. I think that's a really sort of old joke format, but I just couldn't resist. And then this was one about Lord Pryor, who sort of made this comment that the NHS could learn a lot from Asda. It should be more like Asda. So I just sort of riff on that. So it's like one of the chief executives there. Asda way to do it. Outsource core services and pocket the difference. And then there's like, you got £1 for the trolley, mate. So this guy. And then hips, once they're gone, they're gone. Knees, 2 for 1. And then, do you have Asda over here? You don't. It's like part of Walmart, isn't it? So they have these reductions that have got yellow stickers on that say whoops. Anyway, so reductions. Oh my God, look what they're selling off. What is it? The last shred of hope for universal healthcare. And so, was best in the world, now screwed. And that barcode, if you scan that, it says something really, really rude. And I thought I would. I just thought, oh God, I've got to put something in that because they do have barcodes on it. So I thought I've got to put something in it. So I put something really rude in it, and I thought some geek somewhere will scan it with a QR scanner. But when it went online, you get all these comments from crazy Guardian readers, and the very first comment said, "Oh my God, that barcode is definitely not suitable for work. You guys should check this out before you publish it." And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be like sort of dropped. And then all these other comments go, "Oh, lols, that's really great. I downloaded a barcode scanner just to see what it said." And then I thought, I'm in for it now. And the editor didn't say anything, and then it got printed the next day, and it works in like if you scan it in the paper as well. And then the editor said, emailed me a few days afterwards, going, "Oh, you got loads of hits that, but they were on about the barcode. What does it say?" And I went, "It says fuck the Tory cunts." And then. And then he said, he just says, "Oh, right, okay." Yikes. But I kind of got away with it, so I think that's the thing I'm most proud of in what I've done. So one more, I think. So there was a story about goths, whether being a goth made you depressed or whether depressives are more likely to be goths in the papers. This was like a few months ago. So I'm using this same GP who's a kind of like depressive, ground down GP with no name. And this is a goth, typical goth. "My mum's worried about me because I always wear black and look sad. Take a seat. I mean, I've always felt a terrible sense of grief and bewilderment. But since I became a goth, I feel like I have friends, people who understand me, a refuge from the cruelty and judgment of the world. Where do I sign up?" So, and I thought I'd leave you with this. So this is this is what, if you go from being like a GP, a rural GP, to being like a very part-time GP and a cartoonist and graphically representing it, and you'll see that it's got 2 curves on the graph. So the blue curve is fulfillment, and the red one is income. So I'm on social media as the bad doc. Well, I've got a website, and then graphic medicine. Please have a look at that. And we tweet as graphic medicine. There's a Facebook page, graphic medicine Facebook page, which is actually probably the most kind of interactive bit of our kind of social network kind of profile. And I tweet as the bad doctor as well. And incidentally, I mean, I don't call myself the bad doctor, but after the book came out, my publisher started to refer to me as the bad doctor. And at that time, I was kind of like applying for jobs in Brighton. So I must tell you one more story before I finish. So upstairs, there's, you might notice as you come into the banqueting hall, there's a series of panels from the Bad Doctor there. So I put them up as a bit of an exhibition. And last night, we were having great difficulty trying to hang them in order space them and get them to hang right, because this is a really old building, and there's nails in the wall that you can hang things from, but you can't move the nails. So we were like trying to find nails that kind of like vaguely matched up. And there's a very helpful technician helping me, who may or may not be here. And so we got them lined up, but they weren't quite spaced right. And then he said, and I was going, yeah, it's all right. Yeah, it's just about there. And he goes, he said, yeah, that looks all right. He said, you'd have to be somebody with OCD to kind of like care about. So, thank you. I'm going to leave it there, I think. Okay. Thank you.